Welcome to this second video on synthesis, focusing on synthesis as a process when doing your dissertation. In this video, we're going to look at synthesis as part of the research process, including a couple of practical ways to go about the synthesis process as you read for your dissertation. So what should have become clear by now is that though synthesis is a product, it's a piece of academic writing, whether a short paragraph or a whole section or chapter, it also refers to the actual process of reading, comparing, analysing and interpreting sources, which is of course a major part of the literature review process. Just as reviewing the literature can be considered both a part of the research process and also part of the eventual write-up of that research, synthesis is not just the words on the page, but also a major task of the research process. So let's take a look at synthesis as a process and consider two practical ways of completing syntheses as part of your dissertation. So synthesis really starts as a process when reading. In previous videos, we've considered the literature review and taken a critical approach to your reading, and synthesis is really all bound up in that process. So synthesis starts with the questions you ask of the texts you read, continues as you read more and more texts and find similar or different answers, arguments or evidence, and start comparing and contrasting, identifying those differences, contradictions, irrelevancies, and so on. Once you've done that, you can evaluate the different facts, ideas, arguments, or evidence in order to draw your own conclusion. One practical way of doing this might be considered a notes and themes method. In this method, you divide a sheet of paper into 4, or use a sheet per reading, and write notes from your readings that answer a specific question or point. Then, once you have your notes, use highlighters or other methods to identify similar and different themes or ideas. So here I've highlighted the themes of taking information from a range of sources and bringing them together in blue, mention of arguments in green, of your own ideas and assumptions in yellow, and summaries, paraphrasing and quotation in green. I can then see at a glance that both Rutherford and Kirshner and Mandel discuss drawing together information from several sources, and also that synthesis is driven by the writer's own ideas. However, Kirshner and Mandel never explicitly mention argument, and Rutherford doesn't mention the mechanics of quotation, paraphrasing or summarizing. So it helps me to see where there is agreement and that there is more of a functional focus in Rutherford and a more structural focus in Kirshner and Mandel. I then drew on this in order to develop the example synthesis paragraph from the previous video. Another method is what is commonly called a synthesis chart or matrix. In this method, you put your questions in the first column, and then you add a column for each reading you're going to compare. You then write notes about how each question is answered in each text so that you can then compare systematically across the chart to identify agreement, disagreement, contradictions and omissions, from which you can then develop your syntheses. The next stage, of course, is to turn your analysis of your sources into points and paragraphs. One way of doing this is to follow the Peel paragraph structure of point, exemplify, explain, analyse or evaluate, and link. Let's take a look at how my example synthesis paragraph conforms to this common academic paragraph structure. The first sentence, my own point, came first in the paragraph. This was followed by my discussion of the two sources, in which I used them to exemplify the point I was making. Therefore, I am exemplifying and illustrating the point. Next, I explained and analysed the definitions in relation to my current question, which was how to teach synthesis most effectively to new university students, ensuring that alternative perspectives were examined and evaluated. And finally, I concluded the paragraph and synthesis by drawing a conclusion about which definition might be the best to use with new university students. So you can see how following this general approach to paragraphing fits nicely with the overall purpose of synthesis and will enable you to ensure that you're keeping your own voice and ideas at the forefront and using your sources effectively to develop and illustrate those ideas. So as a general process, consider these guidelines as you compose your syntheses. First, be clear about what point it is that you're making. Write it as a statement and use that as the point of your paragraph. Select the themes and ideas from your reading to illustrate your point, remembering to consider alternative perspectives where relevant. Also select any short quotations you'd like to use, but remember to use quotation frugally. Use the language of argument and evaluation to develop and illustrate your point, bringing together your sources and using reporting phrases to integrate them effectively into your writing. Ensure that you're explaining the point for the reader so that they don't have to do the hard work of making the connections between your point, evidence, and what it all means in the context of your dissertation. In other words, show the reader what you mean, don't just tell them what you think. And finally, always make your conclusion clear. What's the reader supposed to take from this in relation to your research? Last of all, let's think a little bit about the language of argument and analysis, which is so key to effective synthesis. Remember that there are lots of different words and phrases you can use to make your synthesis clear. These include phrases for introducing evidence and support, such as, for example, this is evident in the case of, or X illustrates this argument clearly. We also use phrases for comparison, such as similarly, likewise, both Gerard and Chang define, or in the same vein, Smith notes that. And contrast of various types, including concession and contradiction, such as others argue that, however, nevertheless, critics have argued that, or conversely. Using these phrases will help you to effectively weave your sources into your own narrative and keep the focus on your research, your argument, and your ideas. So in summary, synthesis is not just about the written product, it's also an important part of the research process. It's crucial for your literature review as it enables you to organise and analyse your sources systematically. You can use methods like notes and themes or the synthesis matrix to analyse your sources and ideas. And you can use Peel and the language of argument, analysis and evaluation to effectively incorporate your sources into your argument. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.